Hi everyone, welcome to Flutter Junction. I am very pleased to inform you that Flutter Junction is preparing the course for absolute beginners and this is the first tutorial of the course. In this course, you will learn Flutter and Dart from scratch so you don't have any prior knowledge. We will start with the important basics and work out with all cool features up to full advanced topics like working with native features, state management, camera, Google Maps, and much more. You will not only learn theory but also example driven approach building cool applications. And at the end of the course, you shall have multiple cool applications and be prepared to work on your project alone. And I am fully convinced that at the end of this course, you will turn into a good Flutter developer. Flutter is an amazing technology which helps and allows you to build amazing mobile apps. And I am very much excited to dive with you in the Flutter. So, what is Flutter? What is Flutter? Flutter is a framework or tools that allows you to build native cross-platform apps for both Android and iOS with one programming language and single code base. Now let's have a detailed look about the definition. First important thing about Flutter is native cross-platform. We are not building web apps that could run on browser, but we build the real apps that runs on Android and iOS, which can be distributed single-handedly on Google Play Store for Android apps and App Store for iOS app. And the other thing about Flutter is one programming language, and Flutter is only dependent on one language, that is Dart. And the other thing about Flutter is single code base. It means that you can just write a code once and you can have two different apps with it, and that's the cool thing about Flutter. You can just learn one programming language and you can get two apps. Isn't it cool, right? Other than the Flutter, when you want to build iOS app, you need to write code or build app using Swift using the iOS development environment. And for Android, you would be using Kotlin or Java with the Android development environment. And you need to learn these two different languages and work on two different projects to build applications. But in Flutter, that's not the case. You can just learn one programming language and boom, you are ready to build apps for both Android and iOS. Now, let's have a closer look to Flutter. In Flutter, it has two major things. The one is SDK, Software Development Kit. We can say it a collection of tools and environment that allows to write applications using single code base or one programming language. And it consists of tools and then compile the code which normally wouldn't run on iOS and Android into the native code that run on those Android and iOS devices. As it contains the only one programming languages, so it needs to compile the code into native machine codes for both iOS and native machine code for Android. So it makes sure the code run on the both devices. So also, it is not the collection of tools, but also it provides everything you need to create cool applications. And the other thing about Flutter is its framework and widget library. It gives you a framework widget library for that one programming language called Dart, which you can use to build a beautiful Flutter apps, and that's where we would spend the majority of time with this course. It provides you a large collection of reusable UI building blocks called widgets. So the things like buttons, tabs, text fields, drop downs, you shall get that from it. You can style them, you can customize them as per your need, and to build the UI with these widgets or tools. And in additions, you get utility functions and packages that helps you to build what your users see and what your users interact with, and then that code which you built with the help of this Flutter framework, it is then compiled into native machine code with the help of the SDK. So that is what Flutter is. So now we discuss about Dart. As I have earlier mentioned, Flutter uses a programming language called Dart, and Dart is a programming language which is focused on building front-end user interfaces, front-end apps. It is not limited to building mobile apps. That just what Flutter uses it for. That is independent of Flutter, and you can build web apps with that. But we are not going to focus in this course. We just focus on Flutter and how Flutter uses that for building awesome mobile applications. So it is a programming language that is built to make easier to build front-end UI, and it is a programming language which is developed by Google. That is an object-oriented, strongly typed language, and its syntax is a bit of mixture of JavaScript, Java, or C#. But don't be scared. You don't need to know anything about this programming to follow along. In this course, I will teach you Dart from scratch along with the Flutter. So you shall build Flutter apps and you will learn Dart and the features you are using there along the way. As I think that's the most fun way of learning that programming language, and already see nice results the app you are building. So now let's learn about Flutter and Dart combined. And Dart are not competitors but collaborators. They are not alternatives, instead they are working together. Flutter builds upon Dart. Flutter is a framework for Dart just like Laravel CI for PHP or React or Vue for JavaScript. That is actually a programming language which we are using Flutter. Then just collection of tools, set of features, utility functions, and these widgets are implemented using Dart. So you don't have to invent the wheel there, but you can simply write down your own Dart code and then use these existing widgets in your code, so that you don't have to again reinvent how a text field or button should look like, but the pre-built button or text field instead, and then customize it as per your requirements. So that's how it works. And in addition, as mentioned, Flutter also gives you the Flutter SDK, so that all these tools for compiling your code in the end. Now, after knowing at least having a rough idea about Flutter and Dart, let's discuss about the architecture of Flutter. UI as a code, build a widget tree. The most important thing which we are going to see over and over throughout the app building process is that the idea of building user interfaces as codes or UI as code. The idea about UI as code is that you are no longer getting visual drag or drop editor to build the user interface or design the user what sees, but instead you shall have to work only on code. We need to write everything in code. It may sound intimidating at the first glance, but you will see the Flutter has very cool approach for that, which makes creating interfaces with this UI as a code approach is just a piece of cake. And the other cool thing about Flutter is that it embraces the platform differences. After the core idea how you build your applications in Flutter, this UI as a code approach, it is also important to understand that Flutter apps do actually embrace the platform differences while being based on one code base. So we just have to work on a single project, but we still have ability to create different user interfaces at some points or in some parts of our applications if we need it for different platforms, as Android and iOS are not exactly the same. They do have some small differences, and sometimes that doesn't matter to you, but if it does, Flutter gives you the tools to find out on which platform you are running, so that if you are in Android, you can run the code A and code B if you are on iOS. Here, Flutter provides you full flexibility. And in Flutter, everything is a widget. And again, let's discuss about UI as code or widget tree again. In Flutter, everything is a widget, and it's very important to understand. And if you have this app like this, all these visible things all are widget. You can see the text fields or the buttons or the text in this application all are widget. Along with it, the whole page is a widget, and even the whole app is wrapped with one main widget. It is as simple as that your entire app is therefore built as a widget tree. And when building the applications, the buttons, text, containers, tabs, drop downs, switch, everything are widgets. Just keep in mind that everything is a widget in Flutter. Now let's take an example that you have the bit application like this. In Flutter, you don't have any visual editor so that you can drag and drop your elements. Indeed, there are no any other visual editors, and you need to code to make this design, or you need to code so that you can develop your screen. And the code somehow look like this, and you can see all these things are very straightforward. All things are wrapped with widget, and it is not so much difficult to know or understand. You can see it also performs like a bit HTML pattern, a deep. In Flutter it has widget under widget inside widget. And the other cool thing about Flutter is one code base. Let's say you have the list of Dart files and your projects files, and then you can compile it to different platforms, that is one for Android and iOS separately. And then I have already mentioned that it embraces the platform differences. Let's say if you want to run any code for Android and iOS, it gives you proper power so that you can inject your conditions, or you can inject your UI to different platforms. These are the core things and basic things about the Flutter that you need to know. And now let's discuss how the Flutter code transformed into the native app. First, you have the Dart, which has the Flutter framework, which consists of utility functions and the widgets. Flutter gives you the collection of functions, widgets, which you can use in your code to build the interface you want to build. So you have your own widgets, functions, and your own code that is composed of set of built-in widgets or your own widgets, which you can build if you want to build for both Android and iOS. Now, as I mentioned, Flutter is simply compiles that Dart code to native code for these different platforms, and possibly with the help of Flutter SDK. And as a result, you get real apps split out with highly optimized high performance code that is based on your code, but that is actually not your code itself. Instead it is compiled version of the code that you wrote. Therefore you really see code that runs on the different platforms, and that's optimized and highly performant too. As the performance is actually a big advantage of Flutter applications. And coming forward, the Flutter does not use any platform primitives. And also it is important to know and understand that Flutter do not use any primitives. Now what the heck that means? With the Flutter apps we are targeting Android and iOS. Now if we want to add the button and in UI as a code approach, we can do this by adding the elevated button. Now as you may think, what could happen when the code gets compiled to the native code, that is elevated button is translated to the default UI button element in the iOS development, and widget button for the Android, which are of course part of the native development environments. And that not what happens. Instead, Flutter has its own way of implementations. You need to keep in mind that Flutter directly controls the every pixel of the screen. So Flutter does not compile your code into some native equivalence or native alternative. Instead, Flutter shifts with its own engine, which controls the entire screen, everything the user sees, and renders every pixel on its own. And then that gives Flutter a lot of control and a lot of flexibility, and hence you don't have to care too much about that. The Flutter does it for you. Also, it is important to be aware that Flutter gives more control and less limitations, and therefore you implicitly get directly benefit from that. You have a good performance, lot of power, lot of things to configure. You have full control over how you want to build your user interface. So after the platform primitives, let's just discuss about Flutter versions. And Flutter changes its versions frequently, and it's not like that Flutter changes all the times, but when there are small improvements, bug fixes and new features, the Flutter changes its version. As you can see here, there are lots of release notes of Flutter 3.7, 3.3, and there are lots of stable channel of the Flutter. So this is the end of the introduction to Flutter. Here we learn what is Flutter, its architecture, working mechanism and much more. And if you have any queries regarding this tutorial, please ping me and comment. And if you have and found it very useful, don't forget to like, comment and share it with your friends. If you want to be updated on the next tutorial of this course, don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon so that you can get notified on next tutorial. See you on next tutorial of this course. Happy coding and stay tuned.